It's in so much foam, you don't really get drop in fires. I don't know. Well, you gotta be on the whole
Have we seen Rowan? Have we seen Rowan?
Oh, I saw him.
Oh, really? Okay.
I saw him earlier today.
He's not in the chat.
All right. I think we can probably get started. Do you want me to drive, Brian?
Yeah, you're there.
It's I will.
Easier.
Just making sure.
Can, of course, but it's hard for me to figure out.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Just checking. All right, welcome everyone. Just a reminder to note well. Hopefully you've heard this quite a few times. Just a reminder of all the IETF policies, patents, code of conduct. Please understand those and for the things we talk about in this room. We want to make sure this is a professional, collaborative environment, make sure it's safe for everyone to participate. So please note all of those policies as well. For everyone in the room, please join the session using the on-site tool. Obviously, those online are already joined. We have the agenda available, meet echo, and any issues reporting. Okay, so let's take a look at the agenda, see if anyone wants to bash the agenda. I've been trying to keep things updated on the list. Probably the most notable late addition is allocating some time at the end to talk about the working group document organization. There's been a number of discussions around that and definitely want to make sure we're setting a good path forward for the group. Murray, I see you on the queue.
I just wanted to say farewell. It's been fun working with you since your chartering. I leave you in Andy's hands, who's now your area director. I'll be around if he has any transfer stuff, anything else we need to hand off. But thanks for a good launch and good luck.
Thank you, Murray. We appreciate your help. I guess you're counting seconds at this point, right? Okay. Great. So any other comments before we start? We're good with the agenda? Sounds great. All right, let's go into the first agenda item. Dan? Oh, yes. Thank you, Steve. We do need a note taker to get started. Do we have any volunteers? Oh, you volunteered, Steve? Oh, thank you. Okay, so Steve and Thomas. Appreciate your help there. Okay, let me see.
Hi, my name is Dan Petrie, and I'm going to talk about the VCON JSON container for the next few minutes. Next slide. Just overview of stuff I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the document restructuring and VCON extensions. Going to talk about issues that are resolved in the last O2 draft, hackathon update, open issues, and kind of listed to-do stuff. Next. The chairs approached me, and also Ori has mentioned this a few times to me as well. The concept of breaking things down a little bit into slightly smaller pieces. And so I took this task to go think through, and I came up with a slide, right, just to kind of enter. So we had this, original the VCON individual draft that became a work group, the VCON container draft. We had Jonathan Rosenberg had put together a set of use cases, and that was input, and we added some more parameters and things like that into that related to call center, contact center. And so the idea was, all right, can we define a VCON core that's maybe certainly smaller, and then make a framework so we can add these kind of extensions and break it into pieces and get things done sooner, right? Or at least a portion of things done sooner. And so my idea was to take this existing VCON container and split out the contact center stuff into a separate extension, right? I think there may be a few parameters that came out of the VCON CC use cases that may make sense to keep in the core, but probably 80% or maybe more could be split out into an extension that's contact center specific. And then we keep the core schema definition in the existing document, or maybe we rename it to something else. And we define, in that we have to then define a framework by which we can add extensions. It is pretty simple. It's not, it's just, how do we add stuff to JSON, to an existing JSON document. And I'll go through some details about, kind of the impact of what that a bit deeper into what that looks like. And then the other idea was to also, and I think I got this feedback from Ori a few times as well, is split out the use cases stuff that's in the current VCON container document, split that out into a separate document, and then we just have the protocol definition, right, and not the overview or things like that. And so that was the idea, how this kind of split here into these three different documents. Those use cases, the overview stuff, probably doesn't make sense to be a work group document. It's just informational. We don't need to go through the RFC process for that, right? And so, sorry?
Mike, sorry. It's Petri VCON use cases. You're talking about putting this in a draft and never publishing it, or putting it in a draft and doing it as an individual submission?
Individual and it be short-term living, right?
But that's a contradiction.
Sorry?
Do you want it published or not?
Not as an RFC, no.
Okay.
Okay, I sorry, wasn't sure what you meant by publish. Rowan.
I'm still fiddling with the not hotel network. But I would say that it would be useful. I would be useful to consider publishing this and to put off making that decision until after the core stuff is done. Yeah. But like, you could do this as like, hey, let's get these milestones past working group last call and to publication requested, and then it's like, okay, do we still think that these are useful? Should we publish them? And then make that decision then.
Okay. And I think, we have time at the end to talk about this as well. So,
okay. And so the idea is, split out a piece for the contact center. Rowan's got a great draft that proposes, kind of additional parameters and things like that are used for Mimi. I think, and I'll talk about this later, but, I think that potentially some of that makes sense to be part of core, maybe not. I've already pulled one parameter out of there to make part, I think should be part of the core. But, so there's maybe a little adjustment of, what's core, what's Mimi extension and things like that. And then we also have this great draft on this privacy primer that we can talk about that. I think that's on the agenda, right? We're going to talk about that later.
Yep.
But I think, potentially there's some things that we would extract from those kind of requirements or use cases to say, oh, here's a consent extension. And I don't know, maybe there are other, it may be a privacy extension, or maybe that's all one extension. I don't know. But just conceptually, that leads to, some RFC stream. And so actually just to clarify, Murray, your question of publishing, the stuff inside the box here is what I was intending to be RFC stream stuff. And the stuff outside the box is, may or may not, or may be short term. All right. Any questions on that? Okay. This is a proposal, right? This is one proposal. I think maybe we have other proposals, or there's more discussion, I think, at the end of the end of the meeting
we
here.
definitely want to get on the same page.
Yeah. Next slide.
Sorry.
So hypothetically, if we went forward with that, this is kind of the impact is, split the use cases into separate and discussion into a separate ID, split the contact center specific stuff into an extension, add a new definition of this kind of extensions parameter to the top level, and then describe how to specify an extension. Is this all be part of the core? And then the other thing we would need to do, create the IANA registry for the JSON schema and the parameters and things like that. Jonathan, do you have a question or issue?
No, just one comment as a thing to look at when you define the extensions mechanism. QLog is a JSON-based protocol which has defined a fairly elaborate extensions mechanism, so it might be worth looking at what they did, cribbing what they did. Yeah.
Awesome. QLog?
QLog, yeah, that's the quick logging format.
Okay, got it. Thanks. Next slide. This is a bit of an eye test. I should have broke this into 2 slides, but this is stuff that was addressed and resolved in the O2 version. We got feedback from I think it was Murray that MIME type's old, meaty type's better. So we changed that based on the input from Rowan. That were the other places they're using content hash. So we took alg and a signature and combined that into content hash. These are both causing kind of upward compatibility issues for people who have these things out in the field. And so I added a new section for migration, and bumped the the versioning number from 001 to 002. And the examples in the draft were updated to reflect these changes. The media types stuff has been sorted out. I hope. Would love other input and review on that. But I think the IANA section now is I believe correct. I got some good help from Mike Jones on this. I chased a number of people down, and I thought that this was something simple, but it turned out to be a little more complicated. But anyway, so we will have basically 2 media types. There'll be application VCON, application VCON plus gzip for the compressed version of that. And we will not have, or not create media types for the signed or encrypted, the Jose form of VCONs. From this is input that I got from Mike Jones is look at the the top level parameters, and you can decide which form of the VCON it is. And so we don't need to register those media types. This is what I got from Mike. If somebody's got another opinion, love to hear it. I chased down a bunch of people trying to get some input on it, and this is what I came up with.
Murray?
Just real fast on that, you can request the media type reviewers start looking at this early. You don't have to wait for publication requests.
Okay. Awesome.
Thank you.
I can help you with that. Brian.
I'm sorry, who said that?
Brian.
That's Brian.
Steve.
Yeah, hi, Steve Lasker.
That's Steve.
Just curious, application VCON without the JSON on the end?
Yeah, because you can register a format or a what is it? It's not the right term. It's it's shoot, encoding. Is part of there's an encoding that is defined as part of that media type. Sorry, I was trying to come up with the right term there. So.
That's right.
Yeah, so I added text in there to, about the differentiating the different forms, the Jose, forms versus the unsigned form. I had a whole bunch of edits, spelling and formatting and things like that from Steve Lasker that I integrated in there. I think I have one more pass of stuff from that PR that I need to do before that I can. I'll close that PR. Made a body, and this was discussed at the last IETF meeting. Body and URL are optional if they're redacted. In the current, prior, it said that they were, you had to have one or the other. You have one or the other unless they're redacted. Added dialog index, which was missing from attachment object. I'm sorry, I forgot who pointed that out. Added message ID. Now this came out on Mimi, and actually I think it's more broadly useful than just Mimi specific. So I think this is definitely should be part of the core. And there's text in there how that's useful in the SMTP context. And also added text in there, which we discussed at the last IETF meeting about optional to implement gzip. And all the examples now have a link to the GitHub repo, so you can get the non-formatted, mucked up JSON that is kind of formatted so that it looks good in the ID. I think that was it. Next slide. Quick hackathon update. We did some testing of the migration in the open source software to migrate from the 001 to 002. That all seemed to work well, and this it mentioned the MIME type was changed to media type, elegant signature, and now content hash. And then, so we didn't do a lot of coding at this hackathon. It was more design discussion and kind of thinking the two kind of ambiguous issues that we have here remaining. And one was having separate recordings per party as opposed to a single recording for your call that might be one channel or multi-channel. And I'll talk more about that. I got a separate slide for that. And then continued exploration of the appended concept, where you have a VCON that's like signed or something, and you can't modify it, and you need to you want to add stuff to that, and through creating a new version of the VCON with additional stuff. Yeah, the repos there. Next slide. This list of open issues. I'm going to go through these one, but I have a slide for each of these. Next slide. Separate recordings per party. Jonathan Lennox brought this up, and I think it was seconded by others, that we do have scenarios where you have a separate recording for each of the parties, or maybe groups of parties, for a call or video conference. And currently, the dialog object has one body or one URL, and so kind of the two options to kind of go forward with it is, do we make body or URL optionally an array, or do we just add multiple dialog objects, one per recording? And I got the pluses and minuses here, but if I skip to the forward to, I kind of feel like the multiple dialogue object is the ways to go. And I had a discussion with Jonathan Lennox. I think he was on board with that. And quite frankly, I think the open source will support this today. I don't think there's anything that needs to change, like in that implementation. just as a, as a reference point. I mean, that's not the justification, but I think it makes it simpler for the handling of the content. It does duplicate some of the metadata because you have more than one dialogue for the same call or video conference, but that's a small amount of data. And there's no changes to the JSON schema. I think it's basically a documentation issue. So that would be my recommendation. I would love to get some seconds or disagreements to that.
Jonathan, I mean, as you mentioned, I agree. But I also wanted to call out not just one per recorded party, but like in the case where you're recording a video conference and not everybody's speaking it all the time, you're doing silent suppression, I think you'd actually have like one per instance when somebody is talking, and have lots per recorded party. Yeah. So because there's no point in saving, hey, there was silence here, if there wasn't actually any media traffic going on for that created the silence. Yeah,
I don't think I mean from an abstract perspective, it's no different than having like a group chat, right? You've got people aren't chatting constantly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I just think it's something that if you're processing the media out of a VCON, you're going to have to be prepared for this, and you may have multiple dialogues that overlap, and you might have gaps between them, and you're going to have to deal with that, and just be prepared for that.
Yeah. Just to clarify, I think you're suggesting the possibility to do that. You could also have.
I'm not saying it's mandatory, but I'm saying like if that's convenient for you when generating them, it's valid, and if you're interpreting them, you have to be prepared that the person who did it did that.
Yeah. Thomas.
Hi, Thomas Howe. Just to be clear about it, the difference between the two options is in the first one, there could be many bodies and dialogues per dialogue object. So many URLs.
You'd have one dialogue with an array of bodies, which an array of recordings.
Yeah. Okay.
Or an array of URLs, one for each of the recordings, and it just seems like that was a weird exception to handle in terms of just dealing with the object.
I would agree. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I think got a consensus on multiple dialogue objects, one per party. Next slide. At the last IETF, I had proposed like 3 different approaches for the appended concept. I'll explain what that is first. Again, we have in situations where you have a VCON that you can't modify because it's signed or whatever, and you can't modify it, and so we'd still want to take that VCON and add to it, and so I had proposed a couple different ways that we might do this at the last IETF. I didn't really feel like anybody was happy with any of them, and so I thought I'd back up to a little bit higher level, and at least if we could decide at the high level a direction to go, and then I can explore ways to do that within that, and basically it comes down to does this appended the VCON that has the new content, does it contain the incremental data only and a reference to the original, or does it a deep copy of the original plus the incremental? And I'd love if we could decide one of those 2 directions. That then gives me a little better focus on what to kind of work out in terms of a problem. I will say I think from a programmatic implementation perspective, the deep copy is easier, but it really amplifies the size of your data. That if you're transmitting or storing or whatever these things, and I think I think the incremental approach is better from that perspective, and you could from digging into the implementation, you could to simplify your implementation, you could do the deep copy programmatically and then just work on a temporary deep copy instead of sorry, I know I'm not describing that very well, but you could, if you had the incremental and the reference to the original, you can take the original, lay the I'm sorry, take the original and overlay the incremental on top of that, and then use that temporarily in, to simplify your processing or operations on the VCON. And then, you could throw that away when you're done and just keep the incremental in reference. But I would love to I'd love to decide on one of these two directions and then explore implementations on how to do that at a subsequent time.
Thomas Howe. So, what I think we kind of made a mistake on before that I can really see clearly here now is that we confuse the mechanism with the intent. And so, for instance, we have the redacted key, we have the redacted mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no real restriction on what that redacted thing looks like. Like it could have as much information, less information, more information.
Mm-hmm.
But we say the word redacted as if it were, giving what the intent of it was. Maybe what we should have done is thought about parent-child relationships, descended from. And then if we did that, then we would already have the answer for these, which would be that if you needed to add additional data, you would. And what we were trying to do is actually keep the provenance between the VCONs together. But the mechanism by which you do it doesn't matter if it was appended or redacted. It's the same operation. So maybe the answer is that we shouldn't be having redacted and appended, et cetera. We should be having parent-child, like this derived from. Yeah, this is where I came from.
But I think they are different, and I think you do want to handle them differently, right? Because if it's redacted, you may not be allowed to look at the referential, right? So that you do handle them differently. I think they are a different animal.
Yeah, Jonathan. So you've been saying you want to make one choice here. I mean, like for dialogue, we have both inline and both direct inclusion and by URL.
Right.
So, I mean, would supporting both options based on what you're doing be terrible? Or?
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, I could do that.
I mean,
deep copy is easy to explain and specify.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we define a way to do incremental, though.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying, if you define both these, basically, you say this is based on this other one that you find included, or this is based on this other one that you find over there.
Right.
It's kind of just a choice of, much like the choice of, body versus URL.
Yeah. Whether you want it to be big or referential. Yeah.
Just curious, does append imply, like, if you take what Jonathan was talking about, where you remove when somebody's not talking and have a reference to the full recording, is that supported with append, or it's only intended to be you're adding things?
I think conceptually it was, basically editing. Yeah, editing is acceptable.
Yeah.
Removing would be acceptable. I think the thing that we need to, if you're removing something, you have to keep in mind that these, a lot of these objects we reference by index. And so there would need to be a placeholder for the removed thing or edited thing or something like that, right? Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, I think redacted is different from edited, right? We have a transcription that's coming up the side here, and that may be great for real time, but maybe not something that we want to work with, and we want to replace it with a better version of the transcript for the meeting, and so you replace that one with a better transcript, right, or corrections, which is different from redacted.
Yeah, with my chair hat off, that's sort of why I asked that question. I agree that if you need to redact something and not have access to it, that is a property that is interesting.
Yeah, hi, Steve Lasker. So as I've been working more with these VCONs, what I'm seeing is you're doing transcriptions, you might be doing editing, you might have to share it, you might have subsequent calls that are part of that. It feels like the life of a VCON has its start, which might even be pre the call, and then you have the call transcriptions. You keep on adding things to it, but at any point in time, you only want to share a subset of those things. So that's what it feels like at times, and you want to be able to snapshot and seal and and make sure that there's integrity protection on that. It just feels like there might be a different way to think about this, as a life of a VCON has a bunch of elements that change over time, and at any time I can share a subset of those, and that subset is pointers to the same one. So copy 3 is pointing to pieces of what came in copy 2.
Yeah.
But that also means that the copy 3 may not reference something that's redacted and should not have access to it.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if there's a model there to play with.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was one of the approaches that I had proposed the last time, and it was kind of like, I got like crickets and mumbling and not a lot of buy-in on it. So that's why I guess what I'm looking for is, do people feel that it sounds like maybe we want to do both, and I guess what I would like to hear definitively is that we do want to be able to support the incremental, and that would do kind of something similar to what Steve was just describing, having pointers or references to portions of a prior signed or whatever version of the VCON.
Would it be important to reference our use cases, and just to make sure we're not building something too complex and out of scope?
I think this happens pretty. Yeah, I think this is something that's I think is definitely not a fringe case. I mean, you think of just like I have an ITSP. They give me a VCON, which is just the recording and some metadata.
Right. Sorry.
It may be signed and.
Yeah, I think the mechanism is important, but we're talking about what I think is 3 or 4 different use cases for it.
Oh, I see.
I don't know. Yeah, just a thought.
I'm unclear where. So I would love for people to say yes, we want incremental data, and they could also say yes, we want deep copy. I'd love to solve that high level thing, and then I can dig into details.
Steve, again, I think this is where the discussion over the use cases really helps, is just getting those up, what's in scope, and then you can figure out what we want to prioritize in what time frame.
I guess just maybe to clarify, what I heard was like there was a use case where you started with something empty and you're incrementally adding things. There's something where you have a full recording and you're adding metadata to it. There's something like, are all those appended use cases?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's if you have a signed VCON, you can't touch it, right?
Right.
The other one I do want to call out is you have a preliminary transcript and you go back and edit it, to sort of fix the typos or the things that the AI didn't quite get right. So.
Okay.
All right, so I'm hearing I need some use case write-up for this. Are we? Can we commit to both of these, or no? Or we need to revisit this after we write up some use cases?
Yeah, can we get some list discussion on that?
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Next slide. VCON version. So right now, the top level parameter VCON has the version number in it. I had feedback from Steve. He didn't like the name. And, it's just changing it to version or something like that. I think I'm kind of strongly against that. I feel like that just kind of makes, migration for, you can change any other parameter in the VCON spec, but I feel like, let's make it easy for people to do the migration, because these things are definitely out there in the field in production. I kind of would like to, keep VCON as the, as the version parameter, the schema version parameter. Ron, you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask for those that are out in the field, how many of them are signed?
What's that?
How many of them are signed? Because if they're not signed,
Oh,
then
sign doesn't matter. This is
because you could run a script to change the parameter if they're not signed. If they're signed, then
Right.
then you can't do that.
Well, I mean, it's just that, like, like, can't we just, for the lifetime of all VCONs, can't we have one parameter that we can keep the same and not change and make it easy for, those that have to, upgrade, migrate, convert, whatever, having to look at, look for two different parameters, and, it just seems like that's,
Yeah, with that. Thomas Howe. Yeah, so I love it. It's a great idea. And I put a thing on the list today about it, some more details. I think we should be doing semantic versioning. And the problem is that the current proposal isn't semantic. So the major, minor, patch parts of a semantic version each have, their own inferred ideas around it. And so the minor number, when that increments, that doesn't mean a breaking change. The major is the breaking change.
all right. I mean, we've got an identifier that indicates,
Well-
I mean, we can get into the semantics of the thing, but yeah.
Well, the reason it matters is because we're injecting these VCONs into a modern web. And so the semantic versioning of the VCON into that web will be very useful if we actually provide that standard. So I know that's important for us to keep an idea of which one it is, but those numbers really do communicate out to other industries and other places that.
Mhm.
So I would be in favor of an 02, not an 002.
Well, I mean, it's
It matters for semantic versioning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
Right.
protocol. So
Hi, Ori Steele speaking as an individual. Have you talked to Mike Jones about versioning?
no.
You should talk to him about versioning.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have enough context on the deployment of VCON, or what the difference between, a patch or a minor version or a major version in the JSON schema that's implied by the, big text you currently have in your single document. But my general feeling around versioning of JSON documents is like, you probably shouldn't be doing this at all. Like, it's gonna make it really difficult. If I tell you I've got this version, you've got a different version, like my parsers that I have to maintain support for all these different versions. I mean, look at the different versions of JSON schema and all the incompatibilities that come from small changes that are present or not present in the different versions of them. Unless you're really sure you need this, and also after talking to Mike Jones, I would be careful with it. Thanks.
I mean, I think we already need it, right? I mean, I think we've got changes that would break old VCONs, right? Or code that is looking at old
Which
VCONs.
draft version did people ship already?
This one. Well, I mean,
0.1, right? Like,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's your version. They implemented a draft. Like, I would just, before you get into like semantic versioning, I would just be super careful with this. Like, I would just be careful with it.
You got a cue.
Andy Newton also as an individual. I'm not going to go as strong as what Ori just said, that you don't need it. I do question whether you need semantic versioning. I'm glad for that pointer because I need that in another context, Ori. But the semantic version does mean a specific thing to people where you have a major, minor patch. I don't even know what patch means when it comes to a JSON version, a JSON document. That makes it. I can't conceptualize that. So maybe it's not semantic versioning that you need. So is this based on the actual draft number, the draft?
no, it just happened to coincide, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I mean, perhaps this is one topic from an extension point of view, maybe that can be something that provides context here, but yeah, more discussion is needed, I guess.
Next slide. We'll shove that one under the rug for a while. VCON URI scheme. I am going to defer the floor to Steve to explain what and why we. you had asked for it. This wrote this up as an issue, I think, and the idea is register a VCON URI scheme, and so I don't. That's all I.
Yeah, it's just your art.
No,
I think it was just simply like, how do you?
Mike.
I think my question was, how do you know that when this string that's a VCON ID is used outside of a VCON, in case of SCIT, where we set the subject to be the identifier, the thing you're talking about, how do we know it's a VCON? So that's literally all I was suggesting is we need a way to, yes, it is a URI scheme, but the idea is how do we associate this string is a VCON? So I think that's as simple as it is.
but it involves, we have to register that, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I need some text. I don't know why we need this or what it's for, and so you want to propose a PR? I will happily add, the registry to the IANA section. I don't know why or how we use this.
Just as I was saying, when something else is referencing a VCON by its ID, how does that string know it is a VCON? Such as SCIT is our example, but it could be other cases.
So can you give me a PR with a
Sure.
paragraph or two, or on that? Cool. Next slide. I also had a request of whether we should register the media type application VCON plus JSON, and my understanding is no, we don't do that. VCON is sufficient, and just specify the encoding is JSON. So if somebody has information to contradict that, I'd love to hear. Otherwise, I'm going to ignore that request. Next slide. Had a request, someone had asked to add end-to-end session ID to, I guess it makes sense to go to the dialog object. It's RFC 7989. I got one request from that. I'm happy to add that if people think that's important. It is probably, I'm not sure if that would be core or if that would be contact center, but I can think about that offline, but just would love to know if people think that's a good thing or a bad thing, or they don't care. And no?
Andy?
Crickets?
I
Okay.
actually want to go back to the media type thing.
Back it. A slide.
I don't know what the right answer to this is, but it's probably worth, Murray, would they go to the media type review? Yeah, so I would just send an email to the media type mailing list and ask them what the current guidance is on this, because I think it has changed.
Okay. Right. I will explore how to do that after. And in session ID, anybody, if nobody's going to speak up for it, I'm going to drop it because, just we don't,
Well, I've seen a few places now put session IDs into dialogues.
Okay.
And
That-
mostly for tracing.
Right. Is this different than interaction ID? Is that, should those be the same thing, or are they different?
Is it any different than interaction ID? That's a good question. Yeah, I don't think it is.
All right. So, one vote for. Anybody else?
Is there a difference between end-to-end session ID and just session ID?
Well, in the context of SIP,
Yeah, okay. That's the purpose. Yeah, okay.
I guess, yeah. All right. Well, I'll put it in there in a little text. So a bunch of things still need to be done. Mostly mechanical stuff. It's just got to do it. So I want to finish reviewing Rowan's Mimi draft to see if there's anything else that makes sense to pull out of his draft and put into the VCON core. I still need to chase down Jonathan Rosenberg about some enumeration values. That's my fault. I just haven't chased them down. We had talked about making the contact center use cases, adding it to the appendix to the VCON container. With the proposed, division of the documents. I'm wondering if maybe that makes sense to put that on the call control extension document, make it an appendix there instead of the core. I think that would be my recommendation, assuming we go in that direction, which I guess we'll discuss further. But I just highlight this as a question of, that may get redirected to a different appendix. Some examples I haven't filled out. I'd love to get some eCrit use cases written up and maybe an extension for eCrit. That would be very cool. Any volunteers out there? And then I had some other to-dos in the ID that to address. It's just mostly mechanical of I need to find somebody to review them or I need to fill in something or whatever. So it is, mostly mechanical stuff. So, at this point, the big, kind of the open issues, which we'll discuss later, is the different, how to divide up the documents. Do we agree that there should be a VCON core and extensions? And, the appended is still kind of flailing. So those are the kind of big open pieces. The rest of it's just mechanical stuff to do.
Thomas Howe, just one more fun thing that I've become aware of that I want to just mention, that there's a ongoing fax project now going on with VCONs to be able to put fax. Yes,
Okay.
have a fax machine spit out a VCON.
Great. So we need a fax extension, or is that just another media type in the dialogue? But I think that's all I had to say, unless there's somebody else. Jonathan, did you? Yeah.
I guess I'd like to ask, in terms of still need to do, is that just in the context of issues that have been brought up to you? Or I think maybe as part of our discussion later, each of the different parts and pieces, what is the maturity level of those, and are they fully baked? Things like that. So
I think everything's pretty well baked except for the kind of the issues that we discussed today here, right? The rest of it, there may be some questions that need some review from experts, like the media stuff, the media type stuff and things like that. Or it would be good to have someone from, with security expertise to look at the security section.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of.
I think it would be.
Those are kind of like what the to-dos are. Most of them that are in there, or it's just examples are missing.
Okay. I think it would be good to make sure people are reviewing, I think there's been conversations of consent, maybe authentication. I think there's reference to STIR. Those are just things off the top of my head that probably need a little more review. There's probably a list of those things as well. So I would encourage people to go back and fully read through, and especially in areas that they are experts. Otherwise, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Rohan, I think you're next. I think I gave you. Whoa! I think I gave you.
It's Friday.
Is 10 minutes good? Or
Yeah. It's
I just want to make sure I put a timer on because
okay. Do you want me to click, or you want to? Click?
Either way. Do you want to click?
Off on this. It's the last
All
session.
right. Let me give the control to the clicker. There you go.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So this draft presented last two IETFs. So this is for instant messaging, representing instant messaging in VCONs. So I'm not going to go over, if you're really a tourist and didn't review any of the messages from like the last several months or whatever, I encourage you to go look at my slides from the last from IETF 121, because I went through this in much more detail. But the main use cases are for backup. So for backup and for catching, forwarding a message history to somebody else in messaging that might use them later. So in the first case, I've got my old phone. I back it up. I go wipe it, get my new phone, I load my history. The second case, I'm in a chat with Dan and Chris and Ori, and then we're talking about a bunch of stuff, and then we want to bring Andy in, and we want to catch him up to speed. So that's the idea. Okay, so since version 01, there were a lot of changes in the Mimi content draft between draft 05 and draft 06. So those are, we added a unique per message salt. There was this last scene header, which nobody except Cullen liked. And we had strong implementer feedback from basically everybody who ever tried to implement it that said, please get rid of that. It doesn't actually work, and it's a pain in the butt. So we removed that. Because we added the salt and changed the way message IDs are calculated, in reply to just uses a message ID. It no longer needs a complicated structure that has two hashes. However, expires can now do absolute and relative expirations, so that has a struct associated with it. And then there were Mimi extensions that were added, or maybe I forgot to add them in VCON, but they were there before. Okay, that's probably the biggest change. One of the other things is that MLS was designed for big groups. Maybe big groups being like more than 100, but like conceivably you could have you could easily have thousands, or even like a small number, a handful of tens of thousands of users in a group. And certainly in other messaging systems, you could imagine groups with 100,000 or 1 million participants briefly. So the parties index, they're listing for each text message, here are all the parties that were the receivers of this message, is not really practical. So I just said the parties list has an initial 0, which is the by convention is the room identifier, and if you see the room identifier, then that means that was all of the participants who were in the room at that moment. How do you know who was in the room at that particular moment? Well, there is a party history, and so there's a way to insert dialog objects that say this is a change to the party history, so that you can add or remove a particular party. Voila. Anybody have any great problem with that? Okay. I also added some room metadata. So if you want to have the name of a room, the picture, the mood, somebody changes the subject of the room, you can track it. Also, we have in Mimi the concept of both expiring messages and the concept of messages that were retracted or deleted. In this case, I thought it would be really useful for us to still be able to say, yeah, like somebody replied to a message and then it was expired, then it expired, or then it was deleted. So I created what are called tombstones. And those of you who have been around the IETF for a long time might remember the internet draft tombstones. So those are in there. Yeah, there are a couple of editorial stuff. So I used media type instead of mime type. Thanks, Marie. made the case of the field names generally more consistent. I think there might be one or two still stragglers in there that are camel case, but I mostly got rid of that. And I think the last little weird thing is that if you've got an external part, the external part can be basically for, here is a thing that, like, I basically uploaded a specific file that I want you to download, in which case it's going to be encrypted, it's going to have a content hash, it's going to have all this stuff. Right? So it's like, I'm asking you to fetch this specific object, as opposed to, here I'm sending you a URL that I want you to go visit, like the join page for this conference that's about to start, where the content is not going to be the same. So in the latter case, if you download that and cache that and put it in an attachments, we don't want that to replace the content hash. If there was not a content hash, we want you to know that there was no content hash in the Mimi message, but still be able to capture the hash of whatever the thing was that you downloaded. So there's a little bit of text about that. Those are the changes. So this is what it looks like. I know, exciting, this very exciting presentations. So this is 3 examples. So on the upper left is the Mimi original message. Hey everyone, we shipped 2.0. An edit message, so it's just someone takes the message. So you can see the message IDs are a lot easier to use here, because you can just copy and paste them from one to the other. And then there's an attachment. So you can see the external part here, which has got a content hash. Note this was adopted in the main draft here, that format, and message ID. Yeah. So basically stuff that people ask for. Okay. This describes party history. Basically, I've got add, self-add, leave, remove, ban, and update. This is kind of consistent with, Mimi has a few different ways of expressing these things. So like someone being removed by another user, Alice removing Bob and Bob deciding they want to leave, those are different things. So you can express that. You don't have to express that if you don't want to. If you want to just say remove, you can do that. Ban, if you want to express that someone was banned, you can do that. There's a role. If you want to fill it in, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Oh, yeah, and you can also track the originator, whoever initiated a change using the originator there. Okay, yeah, message tombstones, I basically described that already. There is a status which was either retracted or expired. If somebody comes up with another need, please let me know. Or send a PR. Okay, so basically anything that goes in the main draft that gets defined that is already in this draft or something similar, will need to get yanked out, like the message ID, and needs to be referenced in the main draft, that's fine. And then once there's a JSON schema for the main document, I can create a JSON schema for the things that are added. I think that's all that's needed for this. Anyone have any other comments or questions, queries, requests? Anyone else still alive on Friday at?
Is retracted explicitly different from redacted?
Yes.
Okay.
It's like I clicked on the button that says, oh yeah, I want to delete the message I just sent.
Yeah. Similar mechanism, but explicitly different, just clarifying.
Okay, go Thomas.
One quick question. Have you tried yet to implement an SMS network with this schema, or is this really not appropriate?
I don't see why it wouldn't be appropriate, but I haven't tried it. I mean,
Okay.
I think
Do you know that anyone has?
I do not.
Okay.
left as an exercise to the reader.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you.
But feel free.
Well, yeah. Thank you.
I do, however, have a program that backs up my SMSs, and I would be happy to have a look at that and see if I can trivially convert it into a VCON Mimi. Okay.
So before you sit down, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Since you're writing, I think, the first extension document, what's your feedback about writing an extension document?
Sounds fine to me.
No, did you face anything notable or that everything was?
I mean, I just looked through this. I mean, mostly I followed the, what was in the CDDL before, but, basically now is in the just sections. And I just said, okay, yeah, like I need to add a thing to here. I need to add a thing to there.
Yep.
I think it's going to be the rubber will hit the road when there's an actual schema or data definition language that needs to be updated. And so that'll be like I might send Dan a message and say, hey, I think this JSON schema needs to be modified like this so that I can add a thing here, or that's like, that becomes ambiguous if you do that.
Right.
But we're not there yet. So as soon as we're there, then we can have those
Well,
discussions.
I think that's part of the discussion we want to have if there's a formal framework for extensions or, those types of conversations.
Okay. And then the other question is, so there's a something for messages in the charter.
Yep.
Do we want to, is this something that do we want to try and do like something adopted now? Do we want to wait until one more rev until we've done this extensions thing in schema?
Any opinions on adoption? I'm getting a lot of positive support here.
Anyone think that that's a bad idea?
I think. I don't think we.
Dan, why don't you go ahead and say what you're going to say,
Yeah,
and then you can
go
add yourself
ahead.
to it.
Sorry, I couldn't get my fingers to work fast enough. So I think this is a great extension or addition, or whatever we want to label and format it. I'm happy to. I'd say that I think we should adopt it. I don't know that it matters whether it's before or after. We define the extension framework. The same amount of work's going to be done. I can't imagine why we would change our minds after if we decide to change to the extension and core model versus what we have today. So I would vote. I would vote for it today.
Great.
Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to it being, Jonathan, in addition to being useful, I think having something which, exercises whatever extension mechanisms we're defining for real helps us make sure we get those right too. So I think it's helpful both in and of itself, but also make sure we get the extension mechanisms right.
Great. I'm sensing a lot of positivity. We can confirm on the list.
Bye.
All right, thank you. Next up is, I don't think there's any slides, but it's mostly just a discussion. I think coming out of the last meeting for the privacy document, sorry, how do I remove the slides? There it is. For the privacy document, we, I think, had a general sense of adoption there as well, and we can just confirm that in the room, but we didn't do the formal thing. So let's have the conversation, and I think spoke with the authors of this plan that we'll just, assuming that the opinion is still to adopt, we'll do it on the list after this meeting. Dan?
Yeah, I guess I think there's this is definitely relevant to VCON. However, I wonder if maybe this document is a broader scope than VCON, and I'm wondering, I don't think this is the right place for that to be reviewed, because I don't think we're not security, privacy, data minimization experts here. And I'm wondering if maybe that should go through dispatch, or maybe, I don't know, maybe there's an existing work group where that ought to be, presented, reviewed, and revisioned. And I think what definitely leads out of this is, I hope, like consent extension, or, I don't know, maybe there's a privacy extension, or, maybe those are all one extension. Yeah, I mean, that's to be thought about, but I'm wondering if just this isn't the right place to review that document.
Okay. Any other thoughts there? Thomas?
Thomas Howe. By the way, I think Dan has a really good point here. I think he has a really good point. So in our charter, it explicitly says that we have to discuss the privacy stuff, and we are. But I think I would very much love to have other people who are, have deeper experience with this also have a chance to run that through from their eyes. And I think part of the reason why we're putting it here in this group, and why I think it might be the right venue for the publication, is that it's directly targeted towards those people who will find themselves using VCONs in that situation without any sort of background information around what's what. So I think it's a really good idea to find to encourage other groups to help us get that right. So.
I see Ori asking about what document we're talking about. It's the number 3. Steve?
Yes. So again, kind of getting into VCONs newly in the last couple of sessions, VCONs just have so much dangerous PII information. I found this document to really helpful to figure out, like, how do you play with this nuclear bomb? So having it in this group, giving you structure, because developers want to just go off and run with it, and it's great, but here's the pieces you should be really careful about. So I felt reading through it, and it can probably use another editor too, but it really helped put context around, oh, okay, now I see why these terms mean something, and it made it much easier to know how to protect and use and share a VCON. So I think it's really good. But I do believe bringing others into the discussion is great, but I think grounding it in this group is important.
Murray?
You certainly, I think you need to adopt the document before you can do this, but you can ask Sector to look at this at any phase of its life cycle. And they'll assign someone to look, right? And you can even in the request say, please give us someone who also thinks a lot about privacy if you think that it's necessary to make that request. But yeah, you have resources about how to get ahead of this.
Okay. Any other thoughts there? I think I definitely agree about the importance of making sure that the usage of this and the implications are well known, and probably having a larger framework around that applies to all of the documents in the working group would be probably a good thing, but we can, Dan?
Are we talking about publishing this then is an RFC? I mean, I'm not sure. Is that? I mean, it's kind of a requirements document, right? In a terminology document. Is that? Do we want to go through the effort of pushing this through an RFC cycle, or do we just want to make this a?
I think if we're adopting it, we're probably yes, heading that direction. We can have the conversation what type of document it is. Is it, I don't know, is it informational? Is it?
Yeah, it's actually meant to be informational.
Yeah.
Not necessarily an RFC, a standards track document, just a supporting document for those who are reading the protocol to understand why things are and what things are. It's a primer, that's why I call it a primer. So I wouldn't put this on the standards track, but I would put this on the informational track.
Andy?
So I think it would be, I mean, it's marked informational now. So I think you would, I don't see this being standards track,
Right.
unless I'm misreading it. but I'm just trying to think this through. And this is without the AD hat on, but is this useful for people who are not in the IETF or not in this working group to understand? Yeah. Then it probably needs to be an RFC.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that was more, what's that? Right. Well, we'll take this to the list for further discussion, but okay, more comments?
You may also find that you have to put this to RFC at the same time as the core documents go, so that the overall set of documents can be reviewed for having complete security considerations. And
Yeah.
I think the primer looks pretty good for fleshing that out, and I like it.
That's a great point. Thank you.
The only other point I would make is it's 21 pages of privacy information. If you need to say all of it, great. But if you can shrink it, you might be able to fold it into a part of the VCON, the main document.
Mhm.
Just an idea.
Well, maybe that's part of the discussion we wanted to have next. Any reactions to that comment? I do think we want to make sure it's scoped specifically to the things we're doing here, for sure. Steve?
It could probably come down from 21 pages, but I don't know if I would try to squeeze it into the main document. Yeah, it's a good idea, but I think there's somewhere between 3 paragraphs that you could probably fit in the main and less than 21 that probably is a separate document. I was curious about the question of that if it's useful outside this group, it should be an RFC. Are informational documents not, I don't know, available, accessed, or something expected to be used outside of the group?
No, so there is an ISG statement on support documents and like requirements documents and so forth of don't go through the process of making those an RFC if you don't need to. So my question was, if someone who's reading these specifications needs this information, then it should be an RFC. But if it's just for helping the working group get its work done, we can just put it up on the wiki. So.
No, that's a good point. Sorry, Steve again. So yeah, I do think it's intended for people that are implementing VCONs to have some guidance on understanding, how to handle them. I'm not suggesting that should be an RFC. That's why I'm kind of asking what a procedural. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a general view that the privacy concerns are important, especially for VCON. So highlighting that is probably important, but let's make sure we're all on the same page there. Any other discussion on that? We'll definitely take this to the list. Are we good with making the call of adoption still? Okay, then we'll do that. All right, and then the last topic. So Dan did go over some proposals in his slides. I think we also have a contribution from Thomas to talk about this. I think in general, there's been a bunch of discussion about, having better consensus on what documents we have in this group. We definitely want to match that with the ability to support those documents, that people are going to work on those documents. We want to make sure there's a lot of collaboration from the working group as well. So let's have the discussion in that context. Thomas?
Hey there. So this is a proposal actually quite similar to Dan's, not very different. And so next one here. Yeah, so I wrote this mostly as a a reminder to myself, I was involved with the first SIP standard more than the second. And do you guys realize how many SIP standards there are? How many RFCs? You must, because you're the AD. And a lot. Yeah. So anyways, the reason why I wanted just to point that just for a second is to remind myself and maybe us that it's not an avoidable thing. We have to arrange that. So next, please. So I think there are two problems to be solved here that I kind of want to point out. The first is, I think we all understand, is organizing the work groups, what we're trying to do here as a group to get the documents done and out. But the other is just thinking about the reader, the people who will be using these specs and how they're going to traverse them themselves to get their jobs done. And so I think if we think about it from their perspective as well, we'll do better. One of the things I've heard a few times, even now with the spec, is, gee, it's kind of overwhelming, all the ways that you can come to it. And I think sometimes it is. And so what I'm proposing here is not only a way for us to organize, but for us to organize how we communicate out to people who aren't us. And so I have a proposed document tree, basically, going from the requirements down. And so what I'd like to do is, just for definitional purposes, go over what each of those documents would be. That way, at least we know what we're talking about and say this, or that. So next, please. Okay, so I was thinking about 5 things when we drop. The first is the VCON use cases, all the requirements that we have in one piece, all the contact centers, all that stuff that we can gather together. That way, as we flow through to the end of it, we have all the requirements together so we can make sure we hit them. The next document, please, which is the architecture document, which is meant to be fairly thin and more of a pointer, because if you come to the VCON spec and you are, for instance, if you are more on the regulatory governance side of the world, you may have a different idea of how you consume that document as if you were in a guy who's a line engineer for, Nortel. And so the architecture is more like an overview and telling you where to go. And by the way, and so here's another example of something I want to just point out. So when I first came to this whole VCON thing, I didn't really understand how dynamic they are. And if you look at our charter, it's for a very particular reason. The charter says this about passing conversational data, which is what we're doing. But the thing that I didn't really get in my head straight was part of the conversational data that we're interchanging is consent. And consent is something which can be withdrawn. And that, if you add the withdrawn consent to a thing skittering around a network, then it becomes a much more dynamic thing than you would have otherwise understood it to be. And that sort of framing of the context of what the VCON is living in, I think is an important thing to establish, because it becomes very different for you after that. So for instance, if you were a guy working for Nortel, you're worrying about the redaction mechanisms. If you're a guy working for, Ofcom, you are thinking about a different set of considerations. So next, that's the second document. Third is the container itself, quite properly what we've been mostly working on. Exactly, how does it work in the very narrowness of it? Not at all emphasizing how it interacts with the outside world as much, but looking very inwardly towards it. And the next one, please.
Sorry.
Okay, which is the data types. So we have a lot of extensions, a lot of, one of the things that JDR said to us early on, and I think it was absolutely right, is don't get caught up in the protocol within the protocol. You can always have another, sub protocol of the protocol. So don't get caught up with that. So we decided early on not to try to define every single kind of attachment. But as time has gone on, there's a few that are really kind of standard. Like consent seems to be standard. Validation seems to be standard. And transcriptions for the audio and video side of the world seems to be standard. So there are a few things that we might want to go to, but now we're also talking about the other extensions like Rowan stuff. Okay, so that's another category. Then there's the privacy considerations, which is 21 pages even on one slide, and that's basically the content that we got out from the privacy primer. So that's basically what that's representing. And then one more. Is that
No,
it?
that's it.
That's it. Okay, good. So those are the 5 documents. Some are in multiplicity, obviously. Like there's more than one extension document. I get it. But that's kind of how I understood it. Now we might want to put these 2 things together so instead of having 5, we have 4, we have 3. But I want to say it again. I think it's an important piece for us to make sure that people who are coming to this and using the specs, one thing for us to write them. We're going to write them once, and they're going to be used 1,000,000 times. That the people who come to consuming these, let's help them in their journey as readers and understanders, and not like give them a phone book to read, but give them an easier way to get through for their own particular needs. That's what.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
So I think it's, it's good to go through the thought exercise of what we imagine, the landscape of VCON to look like. But at the end of the day, we also need to make sure that there's going to be folks that are going to take these ideas and work on documents and be active in the working group. So, Dan, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just, I guess I would propose that, combining some of the documents that Tom had talked about, like, for instance, the architecture. I mean, this isn't complicated, right? I don't know that we need a lot of architectural description here. It's just, it's a JSON schema, right? And we add stuff to it. And so I think I would probably combine, some overall use cases, high level overall use cases, a simple, technical overview. I think it's grandiose to call it architecture, but, and then, then we have some, use cases that are leading into these extensions, right? And then I think those are separate documents, and they come up when they come up, right? When somebody, has the energy to write something like that, we take them into consideration, decide whether we want to, create a new extension or something like that. But I think I don't think there's a lot of overall use case documentation or architectural technical overview documentation. I think it's a pretty small draft, right? And let's combine that. I don't no reason not make to separate those,
right.
And into a fairly small and kind of mostly textual document, right? And then we have the extensions, right? And potentially use cases, additional use cases for new extensions.
Right. Yeah, I think we obviously have the core container document. We've talked about extensions. I think that's an important mechanism that we need as in the working group to have an extensible protocol. We talked about privacy. I think the question, the one that's left over, if I'm remembering all the points that we discussed, is maybe I don't know if architecture or framework or, describing, but somebody would have to own that document and, would probably look for somebody that has energy and wants to contribute something to propose that into the group. And then we can consider if that's an appropriate document that the group wants to work on.
We can make this real. Let's make this very deep. Sorry, Thomas, how? So we can make it very practical and not theoretical. So a lot of us are working on the integration between SCIT and VCONs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be, I think, enough of a document to need. And so when we were talking about architectural stuff, that's what we're talking about, the intersections between the VCON and everything outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Versus everything internally to it. So I think we need that document, however we call it.
Yeah.
It's the SCIT, Supply Chain Integrity, Transparency, and Trust. We're using SCIT to hold the audit trails of the processing of the VCONs.
Well, so we're not going to predict the future. I think we can have the discussions once document is presented to, but okay, Ori.
Hi.
I'm
First of all, I'm just an individual here. This is Andy's group, but I'm looking at the charter, and you got a standards track section and an informational section. The standards track section has this, the JSON core protocol document, which is defining, this JSON. I like the idea of thinking of it as a document for a JSON schema. Like that makes sense to me.
Mhm.
The last bullet point talks about media types for these objects, which sort of just seems like, a comment on the first document.
Right.
The middle two are about security. One of them is about signing, and one of them is about encryption, redaction, and confidentiality. Those are the sort of, as I look at the charter, that's the scope of your proposed standards documents, and anything outside of that is like, probably not a proposed standard coming from the group without like some broader conversation. The informational document, section is a bunch of use cases for the most part. The privacy document is really interesting because it seemed like a lot of people are really excited about it. It seems like it's important for implementers. Perhaps it's sort of part of the security, documents that you might consider,
Right.
but it's not like there isn't an obvious milestone in here for an informational document on privacy. And, as far as integrations with other groups go, I can see the MIME, message history sort of, part of this directly as an informational document, but
Right.
the rest of, broader document structure that you're discussing here doesn't seem to be in the charter to me anyway. It's not to say that, you could decide you want to do that and you want to have those conversations, but just as an individual, as I read the charter, it seems like you've got a limited set of documents to work on and get to them.
Yes. Well, and you sort of implied something we need to talk about as well is updating our milestones. But I think it's important just to make sure the group is on the same page about where we're headed and what we should be working on, and making sure that we sort of started with one document and we've sort of bolted on extensions. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. So we can set proper milestones.
The word extensions, I don't think even shows up once in here.
Yeah, and
so and the core JSON schema, JSON document for the data structure could come complete with an extension mechanism that's built into it, or you could decide that you're trying to open up a continuous stream of documents. And I think that's a really important conversation, but the charter is not sort of, directly talking about extensions. So for me, that's a really, and what do you mean by extensions?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
I mean, I think the thing that is in the charter relative to the extensions is that, messaging, eCrit and contact centers are explicitly called out, right, as use cases to be supported. And so, whether, I mean, I don't, it doesn't say the mechanism, but I mean, that's just, are we just talking about mechanism, whether it's an extension or not? I mean, I think those, those use cases are in scope, and so how we accomplish that, I think, is that's implementation, right?
Sorry, Ori Steele. They're use cases, but they're informational. So, if you need, for example, like some of the comments Rowan's making about like, as soon as you finish your JSON schema, I can finish my JSON schema, and then like normatively, my profile extends your base schema, and like, that's an extension to a proposed standard extension mechanism, not, just an informational document. Describing the applicability of the core protocol to some particular use case. So,
yeah,
I mean, if that's the direction you want to go, then the charter isn't giving you like strong support around that. So you may decide that is a thing that, you know, is important and you want to do that, or you might want to take it a different direction. But like the way that I read these is like, these are informational documents are describing use cases. You may decide you want to document these use cases, but you can't publish proposed standards around a message history data system or a specific ECRIT environment system. That's no,
Right.
Those aren't proposed standards.
Right. Well, and I think, I mean, my sense is, and, you know, I'm not deciding this, but my sense is that the extensibility is something that a lot of folks in this room are desiring. So I think we just need to have that conversation about how we make that part of the, if we need to change the charter, you know, we can have those conversations. We're already down the road a little bit on that, but I think, you know, we're in this situation mainly because how we started as just thinking about it as one protocol versus then starting to think about extensions. So let's just talk about that reality and figure out a path forward for it. That would be my proposal.
Right. We're out of time.
We are out of time. All right, I think that was a great discussion to have. Let's continue that on the list. I think we will have to visit milestones. But if anyone wants to bring in new documents in the type that we proposed, you're invited to. We need to follow the standard process there. And thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in Madrid.